Welcome. Yeah, I think that should be, probably that will work. Well, welcome to this last plenary session for our conference. Before Madame Dely and the Commissioner will close after at 1 o'clock. So this is the last session where we will cover in more detail what was discussed already throughout the sessions yesterday and this morning, which is how the regulatory environment facilitates or sometimes complicates the preparation and implementation of transport investment projects. And I must say I'm quite keen and interested to listen in a moment to the first speaker, Guy Getrit from APEC, and he will in particular tell us where we stand on the statistical treatment of PPPs, where work is ongoing in the Commission with Eurostat and of course in very close coordination with the European Investment Bank and member state statistical offices. This is an extremely complex and important subject, but we will then also have the opportunity to have, as was the case throughout the days of yesterday and this morning, the perspective of the private sector, and then I'm extremely interested to hear also then a number of lessons drawn in member states. We will have examples from Poland, from Portugal, and we will also look at the cross-border dimension of project preparation with the case study of Rail Baltica, which is progressing and has now the benefit of a joint venture, which is not so common among TEN-T projects. And we will then end with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which will also share its experience and give us an overview of what they can provide to help project preparation and project implementation. So that's the program for this morning. I'm looking forward to interesting presentations and then also interaction between ourselves and hopefully with you a little later after the presentation. We have an hour and a half ahead of us, or an hour and 20 minutes ahead of us, so there's a bit of time for that. Guy, you start.
Yes. Thank you very much, Jean-Eric. I will stand not so much because I have a presentation, because I don't have any, but because those seats are very uncomfortable, so I'd better stand to avoid further back disasters. I've been basically asked to talk about three things. I am indeed from the European PPP Expertise Center, which is an initiative of the European Investment Bank. And what we do is we try to help the public sector do better PPP projects and PPP programs. And I've been asked to, I don't know whether we can see the questions on the screen, I've been asked to tackle three topics which are somewhat related to each other, and I'll try to make the link between the three. The first one is, what is it you need on the public sector side to actually deliver good PPPs? The second question is about the statistical treatment, the famous Eurostat treatment of PPPs. Mm-hmm. And I think it is linked to the first question to the extent that for a number of member states, doing a PPP is often, at least in part, guided by the idea that they want the investments to be off the balance sheet of government. And the third question is something that we hear quite regularly. It is related to the standardization of PPPs. People accept that PPPs are quite complex, and one of the ideas is that, well, why don't we try to make them easier by standardizing? And what they mean by standardization is to look at whether we can have a single PPP contract that would work across EU member states. And I'll discuss that point quickly as well. On the first point, the first thing I should say is that PPPs are pretty successful. They're pretty powerful instruments to the extent that you use them well. And often when PPPs don't work is because they haven't been used very well. PPPs are also much talked about, but actually they're not used that much. And just to give you, we've got plenty of data available on the website of APEC, but just to give you an idea, last year in 2016, the market for PPPs was about 12 billion euro, which is not that important, actually, compared to traditional procurement. And we had only about approximately 70 PPP transactions that reached financial close in the year across the EU, and that's not very much. It's certainly far less than it used to be.
Is it only transport, or is that across all sectors?
That's across. Now, for transport, the picture is not looking very, very positive, but I think we should say that because we are here to talk about trying to find solutions. For transport, the volume of investments, the volume of projects was not even 4 billion euro, and I think we had about 12 PPP transactions in the transport sector. So over a year, for 28 member states, this is not actually looking very much. And yet, we hear about PPPs all the time, and we hear about PPPs being the future, and PPPs being the future of the investment plan for Europe, for instance. So something is not quite working. Now, why is that? Well, we actually released a pretty good paper in November as to where we think the hurdles to PPPs in Europe are today, and I would certainly guide you to this, and I'm very happy to provide you links to various publications that we have that explains why PPPs are not happening. But one of the reasons why PPPs are not happening is that to be able to do PPPs and to do PPPs pretty well, you need a number of preconditions, and those preconditions are numerous. You need, as a starting point, you need a good project. I'm not talking about the PPP here, I'm talking about the investment itself. So you need a project that makes sense, that is economically rational, that has, from the technical point of view, an affordability for government is a proposal that is acceptable. So you need a good project to start with. Then you need a lot of political support from government in favor of the PPP option. So governments need to think of PPPs as a different way of delivering assets, and they need to put the resources in place to make sure that this can happen. PPPs are a revolution as far as procurement of projects is concerned. You need a good legal framework. You need a good institutional framework that is conducive to PPPs. You need to have gateways in place. You need to be able to have government that stops poor project proposals that come through, and that pushes the good PPP proposals that go that are proposed to them. And this is what we refer to as the gateway process. And gateway processes are very important in PPPs. But most of all, I think, you need procuring authorities, public authorities that are developing projects that are in a condition to prepare PPPs and to procure PPPs. And again, this is a question of resources and a question of skills. And what we see very often is that those skills in the public sectors and those resources are simply not there. So you are embarking in the process of procuring a PPP project without having prepared it properly, and this is obviously a recipe for potential disasters. So all these things put together, are conditions that you need to meet to make sure that you can have, that the machine can actually deliver sound PPP investments. Leading on to the second question, which is the statistical treatment. The famous Eurostat treatment of PPPs has attracted a lot of attention. And over the last probably 3-4 years, there's been a lot of pressure that went back to Eurostat from stakeholders in the public sector that were criticizing Eurostat about the rules on PPPs. And those criticisms were about very much two things. On the first hand, a number of public sector stakeholders, member states, were saying the rules are too tight. We don't manage to get off-balance sheet PPPs. I'm quite critical to these people who say those kind of things, because we need to understand that the Eurostat rules are about, most of all, fiscal surveillance. They're about good fiscal behavior. So, having an idea that any investment that you can make, PPP or not, and you raise debt to do that, liabilities to do that, would not appear in any way on government balance sheet is probably not the answer. The second criticism that was put onto Eurostat was that the rules are simply not clear enough. They're not understandable, and they're not stable. They keep on changing. And in the context of a PPP project that is developing over a number of years, if the rules change, you have a genuine issue. So, listening to this criticism, we in EPEC and with the support of the EIB went to see Eurostat and proposed, about a year and a half ago, that on the second topic, which is the clarity of the rules and the stability of the rules, we could probably help them. And we could probably help them translating the rules that they have that are written for statisticians that none of you in the room would understand because you're not statisticians, turn those into rules for practitioners. So we have basically translated the existing rules on PPPs of Eurostat from the point of view and make them user-friendly for people who actually prepare PPP projects, for people who actually invest in PPP projects. And this has led to the publication of this document, and I'm sorry I didn't bring 500 copies of it because it's a pretty heavy document, but it's available on our website, and I'm more than happy to send you hard copies if you need to. That was published at the end of September last year. And this document is very much, has got to be seen as official Eurostat guidance. So this is as good as the rules that they produce. But the nice thing about it is that we practitioners developed it. We made it very user-friendly. We made it look and feel like a contract. And as a result, a number of people have actually found this publication very, very useful. And to answer the second question that's put to me, is this going to change the PPP market? Well, I don't think it will change the PPP market, but it is certainly going to change the way the issue of the statistical treatment of PPP has been looked at in the past. And just to give you an example, which I think is very telling, and sorry if I'm running over slightly, you might have heard of a transaction called the Tramway of Liège in Belgium. Mm-hmm. This project is probably in a way encapsulates why we did this publication. Just to summarize it, it's a pretty significant investment, about 350 million to build a tramway line. The Belgian authorities went ahead with the procurement, and all along they were saying, I am only going to be doing this if it is off balance sheet. And the procurement preparation lasted for a number of years. They eventually went through procurement, selected a preferred bidder. When they were at the point of signing the contracts and reaching financial close, they went back to statistical offices and Eurostat saying, is my project off balance sheet? And the result was, no, it isn't. For a number of reasons, for a number of listed arguments, they didn't meet the test. And they had relatively complex and I would say aggressive discussions with Eurostat as to try to understand why that was the case. Now, the procurement was cancelled. So you have a sponsor that has spent quite a lot of money developing a proposal that was selected preferred bidder, that had banks behind it, that had worked on the project for a number of years, who saw his contract cancelled. Now, with this, it won't happen. And I'm not saying that me, as Guichet in EPEC, I am telling you what people in the Tram de Liège people are saying. You know, because they are now using this guide. They've put a new proposal to Eurostat using this guide. They are going to procure a new procurement on the same project using this. And the notification they got from Eurostat a couple of weeks ago, was, if you do that way, yes, it will be off balance sheet. So now they can procure with the certainty of having achieved the goal of an off balance sheet project. As to the last point, and I'll be very brief.
Can I just interrupt you 1 second, just to also say that on the statistical treatment, I mean, not only did you produce this very good piece of work, which is endorsed, as you said, by Eurostat, so it can be used directly by all project promoters, but Eurostat is also, together with EPEC, available to guide project promoters. Because there was one criticism addressed to the Commission, Eurostat is the Commission, is that they were not available enough to explain the rules. And I think this might have been the case in the past, I can't judge that, but today you have a very strong engagement in Eurostat to make themselves available to project promoters at the right moment, obviously, together with EPEC to support you. So be aware of that and turn to them at the appropriate stage of the process.
Absolutely true. And what I would add is that we have since September embarked on a huge dissemination program, and we have visited about 12 or 13 member states explaining specifically on this, gathering public authorities and the private sector, explaining what the issues were, what the guide is doing, how to use the guide, because it's quite a technical tool, obviously, and we will carry on doing this for the next few months. So, you know, if anything is needed in your country, please come and talk to us about it. On the last point, and I'll be quite quick, this question of whether standardization of PPP contracts across member states is a good idea. My take on it is that no, it isn't. And the last thing we want, Jean-Éric, is a directive on PPPs, I think. The reason why I'm saying that is that cannot standardize PPP contracts across jurisdictions for a number of reasons. The most important of all is the legal culture in each and every country. And the second, probably most important point is that PPPs actually, despite what we say, are done on a very different basis in each member state, and that needs to stay. What can be standardized actually is two things. Well, the first one is standardization at the national level, and this is very important, and this is really valuable. And if it's managed and thought through properly, that can deliver huge benefits. And the mature countries in PPPs that have done huge PPP programs in the past have used standardization of contracts, and this has really yielded significant benefits. The other thing that you can do is not standardize PPP contracts, but you can standardize principles. And this is what EPEC is here to do. This is the question of, is everybody looking at the same sort of issues in their PPP contracts? The way the contract is written doesn't matter, but what the substance of those points are should be the same across countries. And we in EPEC try to do that on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think certainly colleagues will be able maybe to comment on your last points from their own national perspective. And maybe Panos Lucas, who now comes in, maybe will want to do it as well. You work in Vinci for Vinci Concessions.
Yes.
And you have indeed quite some experience, including in cohesion countries. And you're also and Vinci Concessions is also quite active in the discussion with national administrations, but also with European administrations on the regulatory framework.
And we participate in the procedure for the tram of liaise.
So, go ahead.
Can we see the questions first?
Yeah, we'll put the questions up now. Here they are.
So,
go ahead, Panos.
Here you have the questions and the presentation, please, the PowerPoint. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I will try to answer the questions by providing you our view about how to boost development of PPP projects in cohesion countries and neighboring countries, and about how PPPs can contribute to build good, viable, and sustainable projects. So, what is a project implemented as a PPP? It is, in fact, a direct investment which, within the framework of a strong partnership between the public sector and the private partner, aims to deliver services to the users, benefits to the stakeholders, and create growth. It is, in fact, the result of a good, appropriate, and time planning, of a teamwork, which throughout the different phases of the project takes the form of a relay race, but not a typically relay race. Participants should keep on carrying the relay throughout the different phases of the project. This means that they have to keep on working and contributing throughout the life cycle of the project. Yes, for the next speaker. So, PPPs transfer certain risk regarding the implementation and the maintenance of the asset to the private partner. And this involves, among others, designing and building the project under the best conditions in terms of time, cost, and schedule, and maintaining the asset for decades. In a period where contracting authorities, particularly in the southeastern Europe, face budget constraints and they want to maximize the economic performance of their project. So this is the expertise of the private partner. This is the added value of my company, Vinci Concessions, which, acting as private partner for public benefit, supports contracting authorities throughout the different cycles of the project. Before I present you key features in order to develop sustainable project, I would suggest to take a look on the current situation. And since I am from Greece, I would like to refer to the myth of Sisyphus that I often use when I have discussions with contracting authorities in our region. So, according to the Greek mythology, Sisyphus was condemned to roll up to the top of a mountain, a rock, just in order to watch it, him, and repeating this action in the eternity. And in fact, we know very well that this is what happened with several projects in our region. I have the recent example and case of the failure to implement a motorway project in our region region, 3 attempts to implement the project and 3 failures. The last one was had to do with the statistical treatment of the project. It was before the publication of the guide for Eurostat. So this is the one side of the coin, the failure of this project. As far as it concerns the other side of the same coin, this has to do with what we call the transport infrastructure paradox. And since this is an interactive session, I have also a question for you. So please leave down your mobiles and laptops. And guess what is this figure? It is not the success rate of PPP projects in our region. So this is the Euribor 1-month rate on the 15th of March when I prepare this slide. It is negative. And this is the situation. Interest rates are very low. Swap rates are very low. And by reverting to the issue of the infrastructure paradox, this is the situation where, though we have low interest rates, much liquidity, we have needs for infrastructure projects, particularly in our region, and we have the support of European Union. On the other hand, the pipeline of the project is not significant. So what are the reasons we could mention for this failure? I would like to highlight on 3 points. First, the lack of administrative and technical skills of the bodies dealing with the project, which results to poor project selection, preparation, and structure. This is the situation in our region where contracting authorities selected excessively large projects and were unwilling to phase them and adopt an incremental approach. Second, costly and lengthy procedure characterized by a significant number of time extension. Second reason, the lack of the involvement of the stakeholders. This is extremely important. Contracting authorities realize only after sometimes launching the tender that the acceptance of the project by the stakeholders was not for granted. And third, the uncertainty, the burden of uncertainty, the statistical uncertainty. I think now after this publication, we have a better insight of this issue, as well as legal and political uncertainty. So what we can do in order to face these constraints, what we can do in order to make Sisyphus happy. To answer this question, I would like to remind that PPPs are complex projects. Projects which evolve over time, which bring different parties into the play. Projects which have to be sustainable and respond to the long-term needs of the societies and of the contract authorities. And this long-term need is the future which define the conditions which have to be met in order to build and deliver successful projects. And during this procedure, what is the role of each participant? The public sector. The public sector has to improve and enhance skills in order to identify and assess the needs. Don't start with the sections with the lowest traffic and the highest cost. They need also to improve the preparation and the management of the project. And here, the role of the advisor is extremely important. They need to address beforehand, to the extent it is possible, issues related to the bankability and the feasibility of the project. They need to listen carefully to the ideas of the private partners, to conduct a market sounding in order to check the market appetite. They need to ensure a political commitment to engage with the project. Throughout the procedure, different governments and different administrations will be involved. It is important to have their engagement. And they need also to establish, this is very important, a permanent dialogue with the stakeholders, communicate the advantages of the project, and ensure the acceptance of the project by the users and by the stakeholders. For us, this is extremely important. And how we can achieve this? By creating value with the project, by contributing to the creation of wealth and employment, and by contributing to local, national, and regional growth. And ultimately, replicate over and over again best practices. Use past experience in order to build successful projects. As far as it concerns the European Union, with a different initiative that has put in place. Each role, it can facilitate, permit, and co-finance projects. And blending could address funding gap for particular projects. And as far as it concerns the role of the private partner, this has to provide, the private partner has to provide expertise, to provide global solutions which respond to the needs of the societies, and to support contracting authorities throughout the life cycle of the project. In VC, we believe that when a project is complete, when an asset is delivered, when a bridge is completed, there are many bridges to build with the local societies. This is in fact the case with the Rio-Nadirion Bridge in Greece, which was a long-term vision of the country, which turned into a reality by a consortium led by VC as a concession project. It is a project which is in operation since 2004, and it is a project where the conditions I presented were met. And this will be the situation with the 5 ongoing concession motorways projects in Greece. VC Concessions participates in 2 of them, which will be delivered within the next days and weeks. So in Greece, during a very difficult period, we managed to implement and to complete 5 concession projects which have a significant importance during this period for the creation of wealth, and they contributed to the growth. The Minister of Transport, I think he participates in the interministerial session, whose contribution was significant, will start inaugurating, as of the 1st of April, this project. These projects which provide evidence of a successful collaboration between the public sector and the private partner of delivering value by using and blending public funding, European Union funds, and private financing. So, to conclude, in order to build sustainable projects, we need to adopt a win-win-win model and approach for the public sector, for the private partner, and for the stakeholders. Such an approach is a basic element for success. A success which in VC, we believe it is real when you share it. And one last general comment. Europe is our home place, and European Union is our common future. Tomorrow we celebrate the 60th anniversary from the signing of the Treaties of Rome, which laid the foundation for the European Union, for the establishment of the European Investment Bank, and set up, amid the priorities, the social and economic progress across Europe. Achieving this requires to implement and deliver successful and sustainable projects. So let's do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think your call is loud and clear. What I think is also important, which you mentioned, is that the colleagues which are intending which are exploring the option of a PPP to facilitate the preparation and financing of their project should look at best cases, best practices. And I think, Guy, you have that also in APAC. These are available with you and are shared and can be shared. And I would very much encourage you to do that. And I suppose, Pavel, that this is what you're doing as well in Poland?
Yes, that's what we're doing actually. So, we took a lesson and we're very carefully listening to APAC experts, and in fact we fully realized that we need some action in order to develop the PPP market in Poland. The Polish government is fully aware that without the private capital mobilization, we won't be able to fulfill all our transport needs, not only transport needs, infrastructure needs in our country. So we noticed that first of all we should start with some kind of political commitment from the government side to implement and to develop this practice in Poland.
I'm sorry, but there is a technical problem with the sound of the microphone.
PPP policy for Poland, PPP development policy for Poland actually. If everything goes smoothly, I hope the document will be adopted next week. That's the message which I received yesterday actually, so I'm quite happy to hear that. this is something what was already announced in another strategic documents for Poland, which is called Strategy for Responsible Development. The document which has been approved in February 2017 this year.
Mm-hmm.
What the document contains, can I have my slide, please? Because it will be easier to explain. The document is constructed such a way. First of all, we started with diagnosis of the PPP market and identification of the barriers and main obstacles to use the PPP in Poland. Then no, this one, the previous one. Can I have it?
Yeah.
That's the main advice principles for the public sector while dealing with PPP projects. And this is quite important as well because it is quite clear message from the government how you should proceed, which way you should go in order to develop sound projects, as we just said. And finally, what is the most important, defines a set of measures which should help in development of the PPP market in Poland. First of all, the goal was to have a quite clear commitment from the government side, and I hope it will help. Our plans, ambitious plans in development of infrastructure, especially transport infrastructure, we are seriously considering now currently the development of some new road projects in Poland. We would like to base them under the availability scheme, and we would like to do them in a very similar way as our friends from Slovakia has done it already for D4S7 road, which was discussed yesterday. Very ambitious plan and a lot of things to do, but without this program and without these actions to be taken, we definitely will not be able to deliver the projects, especially projects of such a size like this one. What is important is that this document was created with strong cooperation with the practitioners. So the document was not developed just in our offices in the ministry, but we have invited a number of experts from the market, including some experts from Vinci, for example, or other construction companies, and also some other experts, advisors, and their assistance was really very useful for us. And thanks to that, I hope the documents really mean something. And I also want to say again that we are very thankful for assistance of EPEC in this exercise, because the document was also consulted with them, and thanks to them and their comments, we have improved significantly the document, and now I hope it's really a good piece of work as well. Maybe not so good as the statistical guidelines as prepared by EPEC just recently, not recently, but in last year, but at least something which we can really based on, and I hope it will be approved in the coming days. What are the obstacles which we have detected or discovered on the Polish market? They are very similar, I think, to those which you have in your countries currently. Some of them has been already mentioned just a minute ago, but just to be very, very brief. First of all, there was unclear institutional framework and lack of this policy commitment on the government side. So this is something which we have changed already. I hope we will change next week. We had a good legal framework, I can say, but still some regulatory barriers exist, and we have to do something about that as well. We had definitely lack of best practice sharing. So we had some good PPP projects in Poland, but the knowledge about the projects and the share of this knowledge and experience learned and lessons learned are not so well shared between the parties. Finally, not finally, but this is quite important, maybe not obvious for everybody, but the lack of PPP project pipeline clear pipeline on which you can rely on, is really very important for all the participants, not just for the public sector, but also for investors, for construction companies. They have to know what you're going to do in a near future, what type of projects you're going to develop, which sectors will be your priorities, etc., etc. So this is really important as well. Capacity constraints of the public sector. This was mentioned already. Definitely not enough skills and resources in our teams, in our offices. Something which we have to change as well. Appropriate project risk allocation, something which you are fighting with, and I know that this is something which is repeated very often, but definitely that was confirmed during our work. And finally, the low public awareness of PPP model. It has also been mentioned that it is very important to involve the society, involve all the parties in the discussion about the PPPs and what kind of benefits this type of project can bring for the society, for all of us. What we have done, we had created, as I said, a set of measures in the document, which some of them has been started already, and we are working on them. The measures were, we tried to keep them strict in relation between the obstacles and the measures. So we want to have some kind of actions which will really fit into the problem we discovered. So, talking about the measures, we had set up already one central PPP unit at the national level. Actually, it's my ministry and my department. The issue was to coordinate all the initiatives related with the PPP's development and to create kind of competence center at the governmental level. This was really welcomed by the regional authorities and by the external advisors as well. We started and actually almost finished the review and adjustment of the existing regulations, this legal framework which I have mentioned. The new law, the amendment to the law on PPP has been prepared and is under public consultation currently, so I hope it will be adopted in the second half of this year. We have touched not just the PPP law, but something like 12 other regulations related somehow with the PPPs. And you can surprise how many problems you may discover in your own regulation when you go deeper and when you ask the market, what do you think, what should be changed in this regulation? Everybody thinks about the PPPs law, but there are so many problems in the other pieces of legislation which need to be adopted and changed in order to develop sound projects and in order to make the project cheaper, for example, for the society mainly. Of course, we have decided to develop some kind of standard documents and guidelines, national standard documents and guidelines, of course, and we focus on three areas actually: on project preparation, tendering, and standard contract documentation, because we think that this is something which is required as well to help all of us to develop this type of projects. We definitely want, and we started already monitoring of the market and development of the PPP project pipeline. This is what I have mentioned. The new, we had created such a database which is available for everybody and will be published next week again, because I have to wait a bit for the formal approval of the document, of the policy document, and then I can publish the database as well. This is something what really is necessary as well. And two things which create a huge discussion between different ministries and between all the parties. Something which is called negative PPP tests. I don't know whether you know what is it, but it's quite well recognized tool, but not so often used in countries. So what we want to develop, implement the rule that every project co-financed from the state budget with the amount of 75 million euro must be done as a PPP, unless it is justified that it is not worth to do it under the PPP scheme. And project promoter will have to get some kind of approval from our minister to do it under the traditional way. This is completely different approach because now we may say that each project developed without EU funds actually, because EU-funded projects are excluded from this rule, will need to be a subject of such a verification, whether it's worth to do it under PPP or not. And if the decision is no, of course, nobody will ask them to do the project under the PPP scheme. We also want to certify the projects. This is something which will not be obligatory, something which will, each party, each public authority who needs such a certification or opinion can come to us, to the PPP unit, and ask for such an opinion. We will do some kind of general assessment of the project and to check whether this project is appropriate, whether the work carried out, performed, is correctly done. We gave them some instructions, some directions. So this kind of assistance, technical assistance to our project promoters as well. There are some other actions which we're going to develop, but I think it's time is running, and I'm run of time now, I think.
You are, but
so just to answer the last question, which was on the list, what we are doing in order to use more often the new financial schemes and encourage the project promoters to use them instead of grants. Well, the fact that coordination on FC activities was located in my department is one of the activities which we can present as the way to use other instruments. This was not just pure accident. It was done on purpose, and in fact, thanks to this, we are able to explain to our project promoters what we can do and how we can benefit from the FC financing, FC support, and this is quite relevant as well. We are trying to coordinate of the activities in terms of FC, so we are sharing the knowledge about this instrument. We are trying to educate and promote these instruments as much as we can by different types of activities. The concrete results, for example, is the list of governmental projects which may apply for FC co-financing. The list consists of 30 projects with a value of something like 17 billion euro at the moment. On that list, we have 12 transport projects with the value of something like 8.5 billion euros. Two of these governmental projects were already approved and the contracts were signed. 17 other investments is under the EIB evaluation. So it gives an indication that if you if you do it and you coordinate all the activities, you can have some results. And in fact, we have a very good position in EU in terms of FC use or FC support, because if you look at the tables presented by the EIB, you will see that we are on the fourth position actually in the EU at the moment. So we're also very focusing on blending exercise as well, but blending with ESIF and CEF instrument as well. So just to tell you that we have something like during last financial perspective, we managed to complete 7 PPP projects with ESIF participation, so 7 hybrid projects, 7 blending projects, however you call them. And now, according to this project pipeline, which I mentioned, it seems that we will try to develop 23 projects like that in Poland, with the total value of something like €500 million in total. So, as you can see, we are trying to develop these type of blending instruments as well, but what I didn't mention during the previous panel is that we are worried a bit about this blending call, because in our opinion, we should be, as Europe, more flexible in these terms. CEF blending should not be just limited to the priority projects included in the CEF multi-annual program. That's my opinion. Because it is, such a limitation exists. So you cannot apply with each project to our colleagues. You have to select some of these projects included in that program. Otherwise, the projects as such will not be eligible. So I think this is something which we should seriously consider. Maybe not now, because I know perfectly well that it will require a change of regulations. Yeah. But maybe in the future we should not be so much focused on. We have to be focused on priority projects. But maybe when we think about blending, we should be more flexible. So as you see, many actions, many decisions to be taken yet, but I hope we'll manage to do it, and I hope you will see the results, because the results which we expect after implementation of this program are very, very ambitious. You will know them in a couple of days' time, but we really want to increase the number of public investments done under the PPP. From 1% of the total infrastructure public expenditure up to 5%, which means 5 times more than we have now, done under the PPP scheme. It sounds and means something, so it really requires a lot of work and a lot of things to do in my country. Thanks a lot.
Pavel, thank you very much for your presentation. I mean, so clearly, this is a long haul. The work done in the administration in the Ministry of Development has not started recently, but was taken forward over many years in the 2 cycles. But you now have a very strong capacity, which I don't want to make available on your behalf, Pavel, but I would nevertheless like to say that for colleagues in member states which are envisaging setting up a similar PPP center, that they are certainly working with Yugi already and your teams, but that they, I think, should also turn to you for advice and for sharing your experience. And that, I think, applies also to Portugal, which has quite a long track record in reality in PPPs. And José, you will share your views with us now. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everybody. So I will give a view on the experience that we are having in Portugal regarding to the regulatory framework, and especially a slightly different view of the independent economic regulator. So we are an independent body from the government. So this is a very important issue for competitiveness and development. So as everybody knows, competitiveness and development enhancement requires a very capital-intensive investment in transport infrastructures that must assure an adequate flow of financial resources in a mix of funding schemes, combining public funding and private capitals, identifying the most suitable projects to attract private investors, and involving risk sharing between public and private partners, for which, and this is the main key issue, the promotion and maintenance of an environment of stability and incentive to wealth creation by investors is mandatory. This should integrate government initiatives that target the creation and maintenance of an investment-friendly environment, reducing the contest costs and internalizing a new environment of economic regulation and of advocacy and enforcement of competition. In this scope, relevant reforms were performed in Portugal in the last years, namely a new legal regime for competition and the framework law for the independent regulator entities. AMT, the Authority for Mobility and Transports, is indeed the first independent economic regulator for mobility and transports, and I'm speaking about land transports, inland transports, and maritime transports and infrastructures. The only exception is air transportation that has its own regulator. I would like now to ask to put my presentation, if it's possible.
You have it? You have it.
Okay. So, our substantive functions are independent economic regulation, advocacy and enforcement of competition, and supervision of mobility markets. Our main guideline principle of actuation as an economic regulator for the ecosystem of mobility and transports is based on the following main strategic pillars: overcome market failures without generating state failures, including of regulation; building a paradigm of undistorted competition, and this means without restrictions, neither distortions. Protecting the public asset of sustainable and efficient mobility, and promote a dynamic and resilient balance between the following three rationalities. One, investors. Without investors, there will be no regulation to do. Nothing. The people, we're speaking about professional customers, users, and citizens. Yesterday, our Commissioner Violeta Bulc just addressed the importance of all the measures are addressed to the people as a center. Okay, and of course, all our money, the taxpayers. In a wider range, our action aims the best performance of the ecosystem for mobility and transports. And this means promotion of competitiveness of the whole value chain and the power of sustainable development and economic growth, social, economic and territory cohesion, sustained investment attractiveness, and generation of jobs. One very important addition, it must be kept in mind that competition distortions are aggressive to investment, and its minimization in a credible way is one of the best incentives to attract productive investment of high added value. In this context, the action of the regulator must embrace the advocacy and enforcement of competition together with the protection of the users' or customers' rights, including, namely, preventing situations of competition restrictions, like, for example, cartelization, abuse of dominant position, and as well to pay careful attention to distortions induced by policy measures and regulations as a key factor for the promotion and maintenance of the leveling of playing field within the ecosystem of mobility and transports, both between operators and infrastructures. All these issues are essential for the promotion of an environment-friendly environment, based on stable and incentive to wealth creation by investors, while keeping in mind that mobility is one of the essential dimensions of competitiveness and modern economies, involving namely stable, simplified, and predictable regulatory framework with clear, transparent, and encouraged rules and procedures with a long-term cycle. This includes interventions in several areas, namely in administrative procedures and regulation, like, for example, in public procurement, permitting, and in some cases, clarification of the state aid framework, aiming the reduction of project global costs and implementation schedules. As an example, and as it was asked in the questions that you saw, I will give our perspective as an independent economic regulation in the context of the reforms of the port sector being done in Portugal. As known, Portugal started in the last years a wide range of reforms in this sector, aiming the maximization of the Portuguese port system aggregate potential, including the optimization of capacity and rationalization of costs, allowing the reduction of tariffs, stimulating competitiveness of ports, and a greater attractiveness potential to investors. In this scope, the legal framework governing the port labor was revised, as well with the elimination of the Port Authority tariffs regarding the cargo component. And of course, aligning with the new regulatory framework law, ensuring also the separation of the regulatory activity from port management and commercial activities. This is an important addition because in the past there was a mix of supervision entities with also operating some ports. I can highlight the following key factors on enabling the attraction of private investments on the port sector. The promotion and maintenance of an investment-friendly environment based on stable, simplified, and predictable regulatory framework. It's not only applied to the port sector, it is in general, but of course also for ports. Leveling of the playing field either between port infrastructures and operators in the several levels of the geographic dimension of the relevant markets. And this means at regional, national, and European levels. In this scope, IMT issued a statement in last year on distortions of competition in the scope of port operation, including the following recommendations that we addressed to our Portuguese government on leveling the requirements on private and public port concessions. Balancing of the level of playing field regarding port operation in Portugal within the context of the European Union, in what regards to the maximum period of duration of port concession contracts in accordance with the rules of Directive 2014-23 on the award of concession contracts, namely taking in consideration the necessary investment for the contract objectives and the return with the fair fee remuneration of the invested capital. And 3, granting more flexibility and responsibility to port authorities regarding the implementation of the operation model. The port reform process in Portugal included also the launch of the renegotiation process for port concessions regarding public service cargo handling, involving, of course, the private concessionaires, which are in progress and results are expected soon. In the scope of the port sector, there is a plan of investments from 2.5 billion euros to be developed till 2026. Our main reports are especially active in financing in CEF. I will highlight the Port of Leixões, the Port of Lisbon, and the Port of Sines. This last port, Port of Sines, recently entered to the top 15 main port container ports in Europe. Also, I would highlight a special concern in the sustainability and greening issues, namely for the deployment of LNG fueling infrastructures. And now I'm not speaking about only the mainland country ports, but I'm speaking also with our Madeira and Azores island ports. So, to summarize my intervention, I would like to mention that the regulatory measures are a key element for the competitiveness of the ecosystem of mobility and transports, and investing enabling, namely diffusion of competitive market for mobility, and this means without restrictions. Now, here we are speaking about the private and without distortions. We are speaking about the government and the regulations, of course. Promoting a balance between the rationalities, investors, of course, people in general, and the taxpayers, our money, and enabling an environment of stability and incentive of wealth creation by investors, involving a stable, simplified, and predictable regulatory framework with clear, transparent, and incurable rules and procedures with a long-term cycle. That's what I have to say for this first intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for giving us this overview of how the regulatory conditions in the transport sector in Portugal are being fine-tuned, and how important the role of regulators in the transport system is across all member states to ensure that projects can be properly prepared in that framework. We finish now the presentations with Ms. Baiba Rubesa, which is leading the joint venture of Rail Baltica, one of the flagship TEN-T projects. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Maybe you can put up the questions while I walk over to the other side, so that you know what questions I've been asked. Rail Baltica is probably the most unique European project, for sure, in the Commission's or the Transport Commission's portfolio. We are a 5 billion euro expected investment. We have no PPP financing right now. In fact, the project is financed 85% by CEF grants, with co-financing from the 3 Baltic countries. Maybe you could put up the presentation from myself now. In the Baltic, Rail Baltica is known as the project of the century, and I can say that in my career, this is the challenge of a lifetime. To understand the issues that arise around a project such as this one, and we talk about the Rail Baltica global project as the overarching project for the 3 countries, it is important to understand how the governance is set up for it. You should understand that it is a greenfield project that will build new European gauge railways from Tallinn to Pärnu, Riga, Panevėžys, Kaunas, a link to Vilnius, and then on to Białystok and Warsaw. Though in the joint venture itself, it is really only the 3 Baltic countries that are involved in this. Here you see that the joint venture in the heart of the project, RB Rail, we have 3 shareholders, 3 relevant ministries from each of the Baltic countries that created basically special purpose vehicles to be the investors in a company that is that has its headquarters in Latvia, in Riga, and works under Latvian commercial law. And then at the bottom, you see that we are the central project coordinator, and then you see that there are national implementing bodies. What is already unique is that though the joint venture was intended to actually also be not only the project coordinator, but also the implementing body for the entire project, we have now many national implementing bodies, some of them also being the shareholders in the company. We have the 3 countries that are the beneficiaries of the project currently as shareholders, but in the shareholders agreement, we also have the option to have 2 observers. One is from Finland and the other one from Poland. There is no other cross-border project in Europe that has that many stakeholders involved. And if you take into account that the European Union is really the key investor to the tune of 85% at this point in time, it bears a lot of complexity. Yesterday, there was a presentation from the EBRD about a tunnel being built in the Ukraine, and the lady commented in the very end, you understand, we had 12 different government changes and 2 revolutions. Well, God willing, we will not have any revolutions, but between now and the end of the project, I have approximately 35 more elections to contend with that in all 3 Baltic countries and the European Union itself. And in the course of the last year, we've already had 3 political changes, and I can tell you, each political change brings a new wind to the project. What is this all about? Really, it is a fantastic European commitment to deliver a really future-driven new economic corridor to Northeast Europe by building this European gauge infrastructure. And it really connects Northeast Europe from Finland to Poland with the rest of Europe, which should enhance economic development even tighter than it has been done before. The structure of the project, of course, is very important. The 3 Baltic countries have a territory together that is larger than the Benelux countries, but of course the population is significantly smaller. So this is all about resource efficiency and effectivity. Resources in terms of time, in terms of money invested, in terms of potential for deliveries. And here we see already that there are a lot of economies of scale possible with a very collaborative environment for such a project in terms of finance management, most certainly for procurement, for expertise needed for such a project, and certainly of deployment of project personnel. If you recall the last slide, should you have all the professional experts in one unit, or every single one of them have the same experts for the same project? There is resource efficiency in that tiny little element alone. Secondly, I understand that the joint venture and the structure of this project was also created to ensure interoperability, which I gather in some previous, or cross-border interoperability, which in some previous projects was certainly a challenge. And I would also claim that specific to Rail Baltica, in building both the railway as well as developing the economic corridor, it is actually important for the Baltic countries to be recognized in the regional level. And it's very hard for small countries. I'm a Canadian Latvian, so sometimes I have a Canadian hat, sometimes I have a very European Baltic Latvian hat. But we are seen stronger if we perform and we present ourselves regionally. For example, to our neighbor to the south in Poland, or many other stakeholders that may be interested in the business that this will generate. Now, there are, of course, challenges, and the challenges are in the project management. And I think we are in a process to address issues that deal with national interests. Is this a global project? Are we looking at it in its totality? Or is it sort of a jigsaw puzzle that comes together from its individual national parts? And it's extremely difficult for any country anywhere in the world to move beyond national interests, to look a bit higher and see where collaboration, genuine collaboration, not the negotiation between different countries, brings benefit. So what are we looking at? It is difficult to agree on genuine alignment and enforcement of project goals, processes, organization, even business assumptions. It is difficult to align studies and permits in the region to deliver effective and economic technical design and optimize construction cost. If it's done together, it is more optimal. If it is done in each nation alone, it will be more expensive and it will take longer to do, and possibly there could be interoperability challenges. Moreover, and this is a session around investments and financing, our project, in fact, competes with national co-financing, especially if you have national implementing bodies, because each nation needs to somehow finance this in some way. So you are actually doing different kinds of financial investments that don't make, to the business person in me, much sense ultimately. And last but not least, which I think is an issue that governs very many cross-border projects, is how do you deal with project governance that has inherent conflicts of interest in it with national bodies? You have supervising entities to management or to the organization where there's always a difficulty with this. Moreover, what I'm learning from the other projects as well, besides our own, there is actually a lack of experience and an understanding of cross-border project management and matrix organizations. I come from the oil and gas and retail business, and there is a very strong and good understanding and framework about how you collaborate, even if you are fierce competitors. I can see that in the transportation area of Europe, there is still a long way to go on this. Moreover, in looking at business cases, there's always a latent competition between nations and or existing large infrastructure companies about the business. Many of you have observed how the Baltic countries are seeking to attract, for example, Chinese investment. From my vantage point, I would say, get your acts together and talk to the Chinese, because the collaboration will bring ultimately greater benefit. But I do understand that each individual country wants to have its own approach and have a smaller slice of the pie, but its own slice of the pie. And last but not least, and we're not that far yet in the project, but it's already visible, we can see that there are diverse expectations and the understanding of digitalization or sustainability possibilities. And I should add, today the World Economic Forum published a study of the most innovative countries in entrepreneurship. Number 1 is Estonia, number 2 is Sweden, and number 3 is Latvia. So I think we'll do pretty well in the project to deliver for Europe as well. Last but not least, I've been asked to address what would be EU opportunities going forward for cross-border projects of this nature. And I would certainly support anything said by the Greek colleague previously, because he pointed to a lot of areas that would be, I think, of value and of benefit to the European taxpayer. First of all, I think there should be a move to one common legislative framework for cross-border projects. And it could be cross-sectoral beyond transportation at the end of the day. What does this mean? I think we could be looking at a one-stop sort of cross-bordered standard service unit where there's clarity that for a specific project that is cross-border, you would have clarity on financing commitments, you would have one tax regime, which could be different from any of the national regimes. There should certainly be, in detail, common procurement regulations. We have a new European procurement directive, and boy, does it take a lot of discussion in the detail level when you're doing procurement with each of the national entities, because ultimately every national entity has its own tiny little regulation. And the biggest challenge being in resources, time, and understanding, for example, the application of language. And if you're into very technical issues, and I've heard a lot about it from the Brenner Tunnel experience, you can have mistakes if you're translating back and forth. Can we find a better way to move forward on this in light of a procurement regulation? Last but not least, I think it's really important to create common templates for reporting, benchmarking, and best practice from previous projects. And here I would address the legal agreements. I genuinely believe that there is a need for more standardization. Yes, there are always legal differences between the countries, but the principles and the basic standards should be agreed on in policies, in specifications, etc. Last but not least, the issue of regulation for corporate governance for a project coordinator, such as the company that I represent. I think there really needs to be a clarity of roles in a cross-border project with the special purpose vehicles of shareholders and the joint ventures in detail. Right now, we are in the process of renegotiating the renegotiation of the negotiation on details, which is very important. It's important to the joint venture, to the totality of the project, and certainly for every shareholder in every country. But it delays the project for the startup, partially exemplified by the Greek parts. Secondly, I think it needs a great clarity for the duration of a project to understand who is going to invest and how, and what the financial modalities will be over time, whether private-public partnerships or how this will work, but that this is very much on the table in the beginning. For countries such as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the impact on the national budgets is huge to co-finance a project like this. So I think one needs better clarity up front. And sort of as the guiding light, I would invite the European Commission to establish a corporate governance mandate that is very clear upfront, with a two-tier management with professionals on the management board, genuinely professionals on the management board, and independent supervisory board members, which should include at least one observer or one neutral or a so-called independent supervisory board member from the European Commission. And secondly, common, very strict guidelines and regulations to eliminate conflicts of interest. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for your last slide on opportunities and sharing the experience of this young joint venture. And you're right, it's the only one which is not between two member states only, but which has, in this case, the three Baltic states which decided to come together in this joint venture, and the articulation of the work done at joint venture level and then within each of the three countries is indeed the fine-tuning which is so important to see the Rail Baltica project progress. You had a number of suggestions on EU action at the end. Let me just point to one important study which was carried out, as you are aware, by colleagues in DG Move, which is a study to identify barriers in regulatory and administrative processes which impact on the delivery of TEN-T core network projects. It's a study which probably most of you are aware of. It's available on the website of DG Move, and it does indeed echo many of the points which you have identified in your presentation and which colleagues in the panel covered as well. And the next few months will allow the Commission to explore which of these items would indeed necessitate further action, because in fact quite a lot under the investment plan is already being done to address some of these obstacles. I come back just briefly to the statistical treatment. I think this is largely now, and and this was confirmed also by Lucas and colleagues, largely now, I think, clarified. So I think here we can tick that one off, and I hope you will use it as expected. I think on the notion of state aid, also there has been a lot of progress which was made with guidance which was produced last year, which also I think will help to ensure that member state authorities have a clear sense of when state aid rules need to be triggered and when public investment must be cleared. And this hopefully also facilitates work. And of course, there's a lot of work ongoing in each member state on the overall regulatory framework, and this is being followed also under the European semester and economic governance more generally. There is reforms in procurement, taxation, improvements of judiciary systems, insolvency frameworks, extremely important. I think this was mentioned as well, across all member states, which hopefully also are conducive to a proper investment framework to facilitate the promotion of transport investment projects. But we will, as said, on the basis of this study, also now explore in how far we need to go further. And in particular, I think colleagues in DG Move are quite convinced that and I've heard it now in the context of Rail Baltica. I think colleagues working on the Brenner are also making the argument that there would be added value in having an EU regulatory framework, in particular for cross-border, or for the cross-border dimension of the investment on the TEN-T corridor. So that's something which is being explored, and we'll certainly be working more on that, subjected then of course to better regulation requirements, and see whether we will want to act on it. Because we have a few more minutes and less than I had hoped, but the presentations were I hope very useful for you as well. So I now open the floor for possible reactions, comments, compliments, or questions. So I'm not seeing the right side of the room, so if there is someone you need to tell me, but for the rest I can see you, and I don't see any arms yet or hands. No, that's, yes, I have someone. If we could, we have someone here on my left-hand side. If you could just introduce yourself and
my question is on the PPP procurement. All the speakers pointed at the importance, one important factor, and this is the legal and institutional framework. Mm-hmm. Can you, this framework is predominantly national, I understand.
Yep.
Can you point at good examples so that authorities and stakeholders will look at these good examples in EU and elsewhere? And the second question is, can we move towards some kind of harmonization in terms of institutional and legal framework for PPP procurement at the EU level? Thank you.
Thank you very much. On your second, on the second part of your question, I think Guy's advice was not to do it, and there's no work ongoing at this stage, because I think that indeed, I mean, there are a number, of course, of horizontal pieces of legislation which are European, and procurement is one example, and the EU procurement framework directive is now in principle implemented across member states. Hopefully that will help. But I think were we to look into legislating at EU level on this much broader framework, I think this would interact with too many legal requirements and national practices, and having added value here would certainly be extremely difficult. But on the first question, I mean, obviously Pavel will tell me that the Polish framework is a good one, and and you presented it already, so you don't need to do it again if that's okay for you. But maybe Guy, you can point to some good practices.
Maybe giving. Can I go there? Maybe giving you a European dimension. Basically what you have is EU directives provide for two useful procurement ways for PPPs under the competitive dialogue, and the new form of negotiated procedure out of the four. And I'm saying that it is important. I think the other two are simply not applicable in the context of PPPs. They are not a useful way of procuring PPPs because you want to be able to, during the procedure, to be able to interact with the private sector. This is where the value of PPP comes from, the innovation. And if you don't have a dialogue, you're not going to get innovation. So competitive dialogue has been used quite a lot and has become the norm in most PPP markets that are considered mature. So if you look at the UK, if you look at the Netherlands, for instance, if you look at France, they all use the competitive dialogue or the translation of that into their own system. Just to give you what I think is not a good example, if you don't mind, there's Spanish people in the room. I don't think Spain is looking at it the right way. They're using the open procedure to do PPPs, and that kills innovation. That doesn't help. So yes, there are a number of people who do that right, and I think it's mostly around competitive dialogue and to some extent the negotiated procedure.
Yeah. Anyone else wants to hear? Yeah, sure, you can.
I would suggest people involved in PPP projects to consult the site and the publications of the European Expertise Center, which provide a comprehensive insight. I would suggest also to have a look on other countries which have a successful track record. This is the case of Slovakia. We have seen the presentation yesterday of the projects in Slovakia. And one last point as far as it concerns the competitive dialogue, there is a very interesting publication in the site of European Expertise Center. However, competitive dialogue is an option. It is not a panacea. Projects have to be well prepared. It is a resource-intensive procedure. It requires a significant investment from the participants in the competitive dialogue. So yes, we have to consider it as an option for projects well prepared.
Paz, thank you very much. Anyone wants to add anything? No, on the panel? Anyone else?
There was a question.
Yes, I have someone. Yes, please.
Thank you. Laszlo Bayan from the Ministry of National Development, Hungary. I'm still asking about the Polish experience, maybe. It was mentioned that in order to have successful PPPs, you needed at first a political commitment. Could you please a little bit tell about this? Because in Hungary we had some negative experiences.
Indeed, yeah.
So I think that the most important for us would be, again, to take action, to have the political commitment. Was it difficult for you? Maybe you have mentioned, I tried to concentrate to take notes of what you have told. So sorry if you repeat yourself.
No, I think that, thank you. And Pavel, maybe I can complement the question if you allow. Is maybe could you also tell us a little bit which public authorities in Poland are most interested and best equipped in this in the preparation of these PPPs?
Sure. Okay, so coming back from the political commitment, such a pure statement from the government that the government is interested and it's fully in line with the new type of development of financing the infrastructure needs or services. It's really important, as I said, because it gives some courage to the local authorities, for example, that the government is nothing against such an approach, and it's worth to develop and to work on such a project. With such a commitment, we can definitely ask our taxpayer for some more money for project preparation as well. That's what was mentioned just a minute ago, that the problem is not with the legislation, problem is with the project preparation stage. So this gave us a lot of opportunity because, and as first of the courage, that's something important, something what was mentioned several times to me during some meetings and discussions about the problems in Poland, that without such a clear statement, there are some local governments, for example, which are not so happy to develop the projects because they're worried that somebody will come, will make a checks, controls, and will find that something was not done relevant according to the rules, and that's why such a statement is really required. In terms of who is the best prepared to or most interested in the developing of such a projects, well, definitely local governments. They really know what to do, they really know how to do the projects, and they are the leaders in Poland, definitely. Most of the projects, 98%, was delivered by them, not by the central government. This is something what we want also change. That's what I mentioned, this a number of road projects to be developed under the national government level. But definitely they are the leaders, they are the most prepared, but still they need some support. And they, not all of them, because some of them were very well experienced. They are looking at each other, they are sharing their knowledge, they really want to repeat some of similar projects. Therefore, they are most interested in doing such a projects. And the project pipeline, which I had mentioned, also gives a clear indication that they really thinking seriously about the PPP projects in Poland. My role, my ministry role, is to change the situation on the governmental level, and this is something what we are working on. Believe me, it's not so easy, because it's much easier to work with the local governments. They know how to do it. They have quite clear pictures about the future projects, and they know that they are ready and they have courage to do it. So that's the answer.
Well, you said that in your ministry you have one dedicated team to support that. How I mean, just to sense how many people? I mean, how big is that?
Not too many yet, but we are using quite widely the external experts. So I had concluded the framework contract a couple months ago with a number of international consulting companies. And they will be working with us very closely. They will be supporting some projects, selected projects, not all of them, of course, because we don't have so much money and resources to do it. But definitely they will be very helpful to us. And in terms of my team, the team consists of something like 23 people. But definitely after the policy is adopted by the government, we will increase slightly the number of people, but we will not set up hundreds of people to work on it, definitely, because there is not such a need. That's why the question of how to find well-experienced people and such a people with some background and some market-oriented approach, because this is really something difficult in the public sector. So that's knowing what are the conditions of such employment. So it's something which we have to work on. But as I said, currently we will based on the external experts, and we are supporting several projects in Poland currently, and I think it goes well. The problem sometimes is not with the consultants, problem with the project promoters, but this is a story for another meeting like that.
Thank you very much. And you being too modest, I think 20-25 people, it's already quite a significant investment on the side of the administration. Guy, wanted to add something? Or Lucas?
Yes. Political commitment means sharing a common vision. And as I mentioned in my presentation, this goes hand in hand with the acceptance of the project. This is why it is extremely important to have the early involvement of the stakeholders in the procedure and to have the early involvement of the private partner who could add value in the project.
Yes, exactly. This is really important, because it's much easier for me even to talk to other ministers, for example, when such a document and commitment is given than before. Now, if I say the government adopted such a commitment, agreed with such a commitment, please help me. Please help me to deliver the projects. Please come to me with some interesting ideas, and we can work together. That's the approach, that's the philosophy behind that. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yeah. Yes, there's someone here. I got the...
Hello, thank you. I'm Artus Alksnis from UNIFE, European Rail Industry Association. We represent the rail manufacturers who have been active partners in PPPs all across Europe. And the Tram de Liège project was mentioned, and we represent companies both who were extremely disappointed by the process beforehand, and also companies who are very happy now that the project is going ahead. My comment would be that we are really very grateful for the guidance which came out last year. It is certainly a very useful tool, yet to be tested in many cases across Europe, of course, to see how it could be eventually even improved further. However, on our side, we would really urge, especially the European Commission, not to tick off the issue of statistical treatments entirely of the list of to-do things, because we clearly see that there could be still a scope of improvement in this area. We know that the Commission is working hard right now in the field of energy efficiency to see how statistical treatment rules could be improved further to adapt to the specific nature of the sector. We believe strongly that transport could be an additional area where all sides could really sit down and look how the rules could be improved further. Of course, member states would have the final word here, because it's not only up to the Commission and the Eurostat to decide on this, and the final vote would be up to member states, of course, just like in the energy efficiency. But I believe from member state point of view, there will be also very strong voices coming, especially from regional and local city level, voices which urge really to make the rules more flexible to foster investments in sustainable transport projects. So my plea would be only, don't take it off, as you said before. There is still scope for improvement, but we are very grateful for the progress achieved so far. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you very much for your comment, which is absolutely correct. I ticked it off a bit hastily. I was ticking it off more on the transparency side and the understanding of the rules. You're correct that in energy efficiency, work is ongoing to see how far the rules could be adjusted or changed to facilitate further the development of PPPs in energy efficiency. And the work is happening concretely on energy efficiency, but you're right, it does not mean that this cannot also be an avenue for other type of projects. So that is ongoing. Do you want to add anything on that?
Well, maybe I will just add something which is very important to the transport sector, which is the subject of concessions. And the guide that I mentioned and we just talked about is about PPPs where government is paying, so not those PPPs where the users are paying. These are called by Eurostat concessions, and the rules on concessions are about to change.
Are they? Okay, very good. Anyone else wants to come in? Yes, please, here on the left.
Yes, I'm Kyriakos Athenas from PG Regional Policy. I think we have had some very useful discussions concerning the PPP and the mobilization of private finance. I think we are leaving the conference with some examples such as the D4 in Slovakia and also some initiatives in Poland, which nevertheless are projects that would not necessarily correspond to the morning's discussion about projects being able to cash their benefits. So I'm just going to leave the room with the thought that maybe we could, I don't know, in the case, for example, of Poland, whether the central government received from any local authorities any requests for specific amendments to legislation related to their ability to bank on the projects, meaning, for example, land use law or other changes which could, let's say, enable them to internalize more the benefits, turn the part of the socio-economic benefits of projects into real financial revenues of such projects, so that we could really come up with not just good examples, but also good ideas about improving existing experience, which, I mean, by the way, the project which was just mentioned has been the subject of significant improvement with the help of EIB and the European Commission, both in terms of total project cost and some other aspects. Thank you.
Okay, well, we have got some requests, but maybe not which fits into what you just said, because one of the good examples which is just coming to my mind is question of parking changes in the very center of the cities. The local authorities complain that because, okay, from the beginning, our parking charges in the cities are limited. They cannot increase the charges above the center level established in the law. And it has not been changed since 14 years, for example. And they come to us saying that they would like to develop, for example, a number of interesting projects, infrastructure projects, within the cities, like parking areas, and it's not simply possible, just because with these limits, they cannot increase the charges in the very centers of the cities. And they cannot make the projects, infrastructure projects, financially acceptable and economically acceptable as well, and rational. So therefore, some of the projects were suspended, for example. So this is one of the changes which we're going to introduce in the coming months. We increased that level significantly by 3 times. Of course, now it's running the public discussion whether it was a good decision or not. But again, the eventual benefits from it will come directly to the local governments and to the cities, and they will be able to develop some projects. Maybe not parking places. Maybe they will invest in some public transport modes, or they will increase the length of the bicycles path in the cities. So it's a good example, but also definitely it will help to develop some interesting PPP projects in the cities. And again, always when we talk about the PPP project, we cannot forget about economic and social costs and benefits. So this is something which we have to take into consideration. This is absolutely obligatory. EPEC may tell you a lot about this. And one of the things which we want to explain to the project promoters, that this is absolutely necessary step to carry out. So to look at the benefits, other benefits, the financial benefits of such a projects, and to consider whether they really are necessary to develop, whether they really bring some concrete benefits to the society. So I'm talking about value for money analysis. This is really important step to do during this process. So this is something which needs to be done. So
very good. Which comes down to the very early stages, of course, of the project preparation, and the point we discussed yesterday in reaching out to the population and citizens which are benefiting but also impacted by the project. So that's part of good project preparation.
There's a lady there.
A lady here on the right. Yes, please.
Thank you. Agnieszka Gajewska from PwC. I have a question for Mrs. Hrobesa. I think, first of all, congratulations for a very inspiring and I would say eye-opening presentation about what kind of challenge you're facing. And I think you said it is a lifetime challenge. I think it would be a lifetime challenge for all of us sitting here. A huge project for that needs to be done by relatively small countries. And I think it was a very good observation that you made, and I had a question about this one, that actually we're talking about a huge project of a very significant importance for the European network that needs to be done by relatively small countries. And you were talking about the burden that the potential co-financing of such projects will have at your countries. Question is, do you think that it can be like a blocking factor for the whole project? So the burden that such investment will have on the countries, and do you see any way around it?
Well, first of all, the 3 governments signed an intergovernmental agreement in January of this year that makes a very clear commitment to Rail Baltica until it is completed. Let's start with that. Secondly, there is certainly an expectation by the 3 governments that the investment level, or let's say granting level, will remain at a level of 80 to 85%. Having said that, I think that will be very difficult, possibly, in the future. but the national governments cannot bear more than that, to be very fair. So I think in the next phase, and once we have the project in a much more tangible fashion than it is today, up and running, a few things very clear, which will be second half of this year, we should be looking at different scenarios. And again, if I speak from experience in oil, gas, and other energy projects, I think we'll be looking at PPPs, we'll be looking at who knows what, you know. Remember that the project, you know, has to be delivered 10 years from now. The world will look different 10 years from now, and financing modalities will look different, you know, 2, 3, 4 years from now. So somewhere in the middle will be the truth. And I trust that the 3 Baltic countries, because they certainly see the benefit of this project, we will find a way to find a solution. And I have no doubt that Pavel here will help us in Poland.
I will, I promise. Very good. Thank you very much to the panel. And that allows me, if you agree, now that Commissioner Bulc's ministers, Madame Delia, have joined us to conclude the conference, to first conclude this panel by thanking the panelists and also thanking the audience for the questions and the discussions we just had. I'm finishing with one specific point which I wanted you to be aware of, and which also responds to what we have discussed yesterday and this morning, which is the need that in the Commission we further streamline the way we interact with you. And this means across all Commission services which are deploying their resources to either in procurement, in state aid, on fiscal questions, on EU funding, which need to come in and give guidance or make decisions for projects to progress. So now on the side of the Commission also there is, I think, a high responsibility, and we have announced last year that we would create single investment teams across Commission services. This is now pilot tested for investments in 2 member states, and we will I hope that we will be able to have these single investment teams up and running in the course of the next few months. And this will certainly also complement then the work which is done in member states to have also investment interlocutors, single contact points. You're working on that, I know, in Poland and in all member states. And again, and in addition to that, also in our representations, we will have in the course of the year a contact point so that it will be easier for you to interact with the Commission, and we will be more efficient and certainly much faster to support decision making at our level. Commissioner, we finished, so if I can, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jean-Eric, thank you very much for concluding your last plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conclusion session here today in Sofia, concluding this regional investment conference. And please allow me, before I pass the floor to our 2 distinguished guests for concluding, to have you also a few informations that will certainly be important to you for the on-following of how we are tackling this in this type of conferences here in Sofia today. But as you know, we always are organizing also Connecting Europe Facility conferences and 20 days. And I would like to inform you that we will organize our next Connecting Europe conference in Tallinn in cooperation with the Estonian presidency on the 21st and 22nd of September. We will have a smaller but targeted event called Digital Transport Days in Tallinn as well, from the 8th till the 10th of November 2017. And I have the pleasure to announce for the first time in public that we are going to organize 20 days in spring 2018 and April, beginning of May, in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Great. I would now like to invite the chair of the TRAN Committee of the European Parliament, Mr. Karima Delli, to conclude together with Commissioner Violeta Bulc this conference here in Sofia. Mrs. Delli, the floor is yours.
Dear Commissioner, dear Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, please allow me a few words. It's a pleasure to be here a few words to conclude this very intensive and rewarding conference. The past 1.5 days along us to share our experience and our expectation for the development of the Trans-European Transport Network, TEN-T, and of a low-carbon transport system and sustainable mobility in Europe. I would like to thank you for sharing your views and your ideas. For me, the discussion has light that a lot has been accomplished over recent years in terms of cooperation and financing of TEN-T. We should carry on this dynamic to further complete the network, to putting forward the projects that are still in the pipeline in member states and regions, and by providing the necessary resources. We should also bring on the TEN-T to improve cooperation between all parts of the Union, as well as the cooperation with neighboring partners. Best practices example from different corridors clearly show that when member states overcome barriers and cooperate, they achieve concrete European and win-win situation. Win-win situation. TEN-T is there to connect people and business across Europe, and is a very good concrete example of a deed, a value of Europe. But it's very important is a message which needs to be spread more to our citizens. It's a time to open the challenge in view of public budget and find the necessary final resources in light and for the investment in need. There is a lot of long homework waiting for all of us. Make sure that the European Parliament supports this way. Dear fellow participants, let me finish by thanking the Commission for this excellent work conference and by assuring you that the Committee on Transport and Tourism of the European Parliament continue to work hard to make sure that the project of an efficient, safe and sustainable European transport network can be a success. Thank you.
Mrs. Karima Delli, thank you very much for the support of the European Parliament, and thank you for joining us here in Sofia, and looking forward to the future cooperation that we will certainly have to create this win-win situation. Commissioner Violeta Bulc, I invite you to close the conference, and thank you for doing so here together with all of us.
Znasz to? Dobrze.
It's good that we know how to joke. Anyway, it's a real pleasure from my heart to be here also at the end of these two incredible events. Deep thank you. 690 registered participants.
600. Registered.
547 active ones. Amazing, simply amazing. A very strong message, a lot of responsibilities, but with a joy. So events like that don't just happen. So I would do the opposite order, and I would first like to thank you. Thank you to my excellent DG Move, led by Gerald Reuters, for really incredible organization. Everything worked really well. Thank you to our Bulgarian friends. I think this was a great test for your presidency in a couple of months. Especially the Minister Alexeyev, who was with us both 2 days all the time, with few interruptions because of the preparation for the elections. Thank you to you, project promoters, who came here with concrete projects. This is an incredible step forward. A year ago, there were 0 projects from cohesion member states, except one who was emerging in Slovakia. Today we had, and yesterday we had concrete projects with concrete discussions, and there are even few, as I was informed, that can go already forward. That is really a big achievement. I know that in 2 years, when we're going to have 100 projects, we will look back and say, well, you know, this is now the real thing, but the road has been paved today. And that's why this conference in Sofia will be really well marked as a historical step forward. Thank you to MEPs, and of course, my dear friend, Corina Deli, the chair of the TRAM committee, that you were here, because this path we have to walk together. Thank you to presidency. It's really important that Trinity works: Council, Parliament, and the Commission. And that is a very strong model, moving away from just 2 partners who can argue very easily, to 3 strong partners who will now work together, shoulder to shoulder, to make sure that there is enough investments in transport, which is so important for the future development of EU on a social, economical, and political level. Thank you to, of course, all delegations and ministers who were here with us for these 2 days, because without administration being very strongly present and hearing and communicating the challenges, we're not going to be able to move forward either. And thank you, of course, to all of you investors who dare to come and who dare to listen. And I was really happy to see yesterday some very familiar faces who've been now coming to more and more of our events, seeing that it's worth investing in European transport. And we will do more, because through the really constructive discussions that were going out throughout both days, we really learned a lot. I have to say I've been extremely impressed with the interventions. They're concrete, they're very down to earth, very operational, and that's exactly the language we need if we want to move forward. But in spite of that, I'd like to point out a few very human-related elements that emerged out of our discussions. First, I've heard very clearly, investments drive the development. And I think we can take this as one of axioms. We don't need to discuss this anymore. Second one, very clear message. Grants are still needed, and for me, very important message, cohesion countries are open to take on board also innovative financial mechanisms. I also heard that blending is a good tool to help, especially cohesion countries, to readjust to new conditions that are out there on the market. And above all, I've heard that more clarity, more simplification, leading towards one-stop shopping solutions is needed. We'll do it. We'll deliver. We know what we have to do. It's a lot of readjustments and a lot of additional meetings that will have to take place, but we'll do it, right? With DG Move. We'll do it with EIB Bank, we'll do it with DG Move, we'll do it with all our excellent coordinators on TEN-T networks, and we will do it with the help of all of you who will, I know, watch us very closely and be very loud if we don't deliver. But I would like to now use this opportunity and bring your attention to three important content elements that are on our table as we speak. First is that we really have to deliver on blending, the first blending, and learn from it. That we can set up a very sustainable and solid framework for the next MFF, which is the second topic. I want us to be very systemically, holistically ready for the next MFF. So I need really good information from you. My services need good information from you because our documents are as good as your information. So let's work together very strongly on this and make sure that we deliver a good paper that the Parliament and the Council will just say yes. Yes? So it's going to be a challenge, but I think we can do that too. And the third topic that I'd like to bring your attention to is the white paper that President Juncker put out a couple of days ago, and it's a real open invitation for us to co-create the future of Europe. And I'd like transport to be very vocal on that one. We have 5 scenarios that none of them is Commission scenario, but they are the scenarios about which the member states and stakeholders out there have been discussing and, in the last couple of years. These are scenarios that we recognize that have different levels of support out there. Now we need to be bold enough to say what we want. And I would like to have a bit of a sectorial as well presence, because it's going to be an important input for our next MFF as well. So I'm inviting comments from your side and that we can co-create the story of transport, that we know what we stand for and how we can, in the best possible way, also contribute to the future of Europe. And it's not about really so much the number of projects and which projects where. It is really all about us being ready to deliver. Because as it was one of the concluding remarks at the previous session here on the stage, we really don't know what's coming tomorrow. We really cannot predict the future. But one thing I know, that if we stick together, if we communicate, if we coordinate our work, if we don't walk away from a table, but we continue to negotiate until we find a solution, the future is bright. And we will be able to respond to whichever challenge will come our way. And that's why, because I feel that energy in all of my partners, I'm really, really happy to be able to lead this sector or this portfolio for 2.5 more years. So let's put our strengths together, let's deliver, and the future of you is much brighter than maybe the media impression is currently. And I have a full faith that peace and common prosperity comes above all local interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for such inspiring words. And now I'm going to be very bureaucratic and invite you to lunch. There is a lunch here in the hall, and also all the delegations are invited to the Kyoto room for their part of the lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been a fantastic conference.